Hello and welcome to another Archaeoscope. Now, Archaeoscope is a bit like an inverted Questions of Doom, where rather than you sending me a question to try and research and answer to the best of my ability, I send you a question by video for you to have a think about, and together, through the discussion, through the comments below, we come up with an answer which one of us on our own might never have thought of. In other words, we come up with a meta response, and hopefully we all benefit from that. Now, today's episode is an outdoor Archaeoscope, and the reason for that is because I wanted to film in front of this thing here. This is a reconstruction of Hadrian's Wall, and just in front of it, i.e. just behind me, is the real wall running along a ditch. Well, you can't quite see it from here, but trust me, it's there. So we're just in front of Hadrian's Wall, and this episode has been inspired by a whole host of Questions of Doom questions that I've been receiving, linked with Hadrian's Wall. Essentially this year, this September, will see a very important event for the entire United Kingdom, and that is the Scottish vote on independence. On the 18th of September, which happens to be mine and Mrs. Soup's wedding anniversary, the Scottish people will get to vote on whether or not they stay in the United Kingdom. And this has huge implications for an institution which is 308 years old or thereabouts. So it's crucial, and it's a moment in time which seems to be inspiring many people to ask a very particular question of me, and that is, being based here in Wallsend, what does it feel like to suddenly possibly be living on the border, to be straddling the line between Scotland and England? If the vote goes through, I'll be on the edge of two entirely different entities. Now, I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is, I mean, initially I was just going to make a Question of Doom answer, essentially sort of dismissing those questions, because actually Hadrian's Wall is not the border between England and Scotland. There's about 70 miles from where I'm sitting to the Scottish border on the east side of the coast, and about 120 miles from here to Edinburgh. So it's certainly not the border. But I thought it was worthwhile discussing, because actually in many people's minds the popular idea is that Hadrian's Wall is in fact the border between Scotland and England. And I can't help but think that, well, two things. First of all, this actually shows a general misunderstanding as to the physical situation of Hadrian's Wall, but also as well, perhaps the fact, because it informs so many people's opinions on this debate, I'm wondering whether or not archaeology actually has any place at all when thinking about the Scotland, England, United Kingdom issue. Now, as soon as the vote was announced, there were lots of popular ideas running around linked with Hadrian's Wall. For example, newspapers, notably based in London, were saying, oh, there'll be border checks on Hadrian's Wall, they'll be checking you for illicit whiskey on the way back to England. And again, this concept of Hadrian's Wall being this divide was given even more fresh life as soon as the vote on independence was announced. Now, in truth, the Hadrian's Wall's never really acted as that kind of a border. It's been much more permeable throughout its life than it has been a solid defensive barrier. For the Romans even, for example, Hadrian's Wall, it seems, was much more like a way of funneling taxable traffic through particular places in the wall, north and south of the border. Hadrian's Wall was hardly ever actually attacked. And in that sense, as a military installation, it was thought when it was being built, it was kind of like R&R actually for soldiers. You'd go up there, build a section of the wall, and it'd be quite good for your unit, quite relaxing. So even when it was being built, Hadrian's Wall wasn't a defensive thing, it was a symbolic thing, and it was there to mark the edge of expansion. In the age of Hadrian, he said no more, this far, no further. Now in North Africa, they didn't need a wall. They had the desert. All they needed was some towers to monitor caravans coming north and south in order to tax those. So even for the Romans, Hadrian's Wall wasn't really a barrier. Later on in time, for example with the Saxons and the Vikings, they largely ignored Hadrian's Wall as a barrier, that is. They certainly knew it was here. For example, the next town along from Wallsend, where I live, is actually, well, in that direction, sorry, it's called Walker. Walker comes from the Old Norse Walkir, meaning marsh, by the wall. Once again, you can tell just by looking at where the Vikings settled. They settled all the way along the east coast of these islands, in Scotland, in northern England, in North Yorkshire, down in East Anglia. Hadrian's Wall wasn't really a divisive thing. The Vikings ignored it, and also so did the Saxons when it came to setting up the Heptarchy. Northumberland extended beyond Hadrian's Wall to the north. It wasn't the thing which defined where England started, or rather England ended and Scotland began. Once again, with the Border Reivers in the 1600s, under James I of England and the 6th of Scotland, Hadrian's Wall wasn't really a border. It was in the borders, which was a term which was banned by him, incidentally, but it was also seen as a sort of like a staging post. So you'd meet at, say, Housted's Fort, and then come south, or maybe even go north for a raiding party. It wasn't a line. It didn't delineate north from south, and that was at a time when truly Scottish people, I'm not talking about Picts or any other mixture of groups, this self-identifying group of Scots were definitely attacking England, and Hadrian's Wall was not the line separating the two. So it's never really been that kind of a border, and yet nationally, internationally even. For example, recently epic rap battles of history made mention of William Wallace and Hadrian's Wall being the thing which keeps Scotland at bay, as it were. Internationally, Hadrian's Wall has this reputation. And it leads me to wonder, I suppose, what is more important, historical truth or sort of, I suppose, nationalistic or identity truth, or rather reality? In many ways, Hadrian's Wall has had such a psychological impact on this island that it can be seen as being a true barrier. If Hadrian's Wall wasn't here, then perhaps actually the development of Scotland and England, particularly in the post-Roman era, would have been very different. That's really a matter for conjecture, but I just find it to be a fascinating concept. Now actually, when we talk about identity, reality as opposed to historical truth, another good example would be William Wallace and Mel Gibson's movie. Now I love Braveheart. I think it's a fantastic film. When I was a teenager, I watched it all the time, and we still own it on DVD today. But it is undeniably rife with historical inaccuracies. Wallace, for example, never sacked the city of York. Wallace and co. almost certainly never wore blue woad face paint on their faces. But it is undeniable that this film stirred up such a fervour, such a nationalistic pride in Scottish people, that in the years after the film, the SNP, the Scottish National Party, saw a huge boost in support for it. Arguably, it started in the modern era, at least, with Mel Gibson's film. And for many people, the truth of that film isn't as important as the spirit of it. The Highland Way, a very charismatic message was put across. And that, I suppose, is the crux of what I'm getting at. What role should history and archaeology play in this discussion? Should it play any role at all? I'm reminded of a quote from a chap called Dean, or William Ralph Inge. So Dean Inge or William Ralph Inge. He said, "A nation is a society united by a delusion about its ancestry and by a common hatred of its neighbours." And is that really what we're talking about here? We're actually talking about a common delusion in both England and Scotland, and indeed internationally, and that is what makes a nation. That is essentially what matters in this instance. Now, as a proud Welshman, I fully understand the desire to make sure everyone knows that I'm not English. I really do. But what I don't do personally is change history and change or ignore historical facts to suit that narrative. I wonder whether or not that is happening in this case, and whether or not actually people deserve a better broad understanding of, for example, the role of Hadrian's Wall throughout history. So I suppose following those questions that I received with regards to Hadrian's Wall and being suddenly on this border between two separate nations, my question would be, should archaeology even be used in this debate? Should history be used in this debate? I think if it is going to be used, it should be used accurately, and people shouldn't allow themselves to be convinced to vote one way or another based on essentially a popularist notion of an internationally significant monument. We should have a much more nuanced understanding of the relationship between Scotland, England, and also frankly the north of England and the south of Scotland. There's a very complicated relationship which many people today do recognise, but the popular idea is not so nuanced. If it's not going to be used, then perhaps I think, or rather sorry, if an accurate view of history and archaeology isn't going to be employed, if we want to settle with the sort of the cartoon of the wall keeping the Scots at bay, then perhaps we should be looking to the future. People in Scotland in particular should not really think about the past, but think about what they want from this vote in terms of building a new nation, in terms of forging a way forward economically, nationalistically, culturally, in terms of education and fiscal policy. Perhaps that should be the focus. Maybe we should just leave Hadrian's Wall out of it altogether. Ultimately, I'm not really sure where I sit on this. I mean, I'm not going to say where I sit on the Scotland-England, also the Scotland-United Kingdom vote. I mean, for example, one thing I do find fascinating, though, is that this whole situation, Great Britain, was brought about by a Scottish king. King James I was the first man, or the first monarch, rather, sorry, to make use of the term Magna Britannia, Great Britain. He brought these nations together, a Scot, and the Scots benefited greatly initially under that union. So I think historically it's interesting that Scotland now wants to break it off. Obviously, more recently, politics hasn't served either Scotland, the north of England, or indeed Wales very well. But it's an interesting question. I'm not here to talk about whether or not people should vote yes or no, or to stay in the Union. But I suppose my question is, what role should history and archaeology play in this debate? And if it is going to play a role, how much accuracy, how much truth should people be looking for? Or is simply the received wisdom, the identity truth, as it were, the identity reality in many cases, enough? Should Hadrian's Wall be that cartoon, that thing which actually has divided two halves of this island, or 1/3 and another 2/3? It's probably more like two halves, but anyway, should it maintain that role in this debate, or should actually people be encouraged to have a more more inquisitive, a much more of an interrogation approach when it comes to the concept of history and the history of the North and the South when it comes to this wonderful wall, but nonetheless also, for many people, a defining barrier. I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about, and hopefully this will stir up some useful discussion. I really want to know really what role should such monuments play, or indeed should archaeologists just accept that actually archaeology is always the playground of politics, and that in some cases we just need to stay out of the way. Who knows? Anyway, I look forward to seeing what you think. As ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.